Well, you know what time it is? It's 500 years, almost exactly 500 years after Martin Luther posted the 95 Theses on the door at Wittenberg, the cathedral door at Wittenberg, and launched the Reformation, triggered the Renaissance, increased the number of books from a few hundred to a few million. Books that used to be certified only by bishops or cardinals could now be read directly by personal readers. It was a transformation of the world that worked through a transformation of information technology. And now Google comes along and wants us to believe it's all over. You know, we now have artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithmic biology, all these developments that, according to Google, are a new eschaton. You know what an eschaton is? A final thing. Eschatology is the study of climaxes and final things. But this turns out to be a very typical experience in the history of technology. That an existing generation, the incumbent generation, imagines that its technology solves the fundamental human problem. You know, this happened with Marx. This was really the essence of Marxism. Marx declared that the Industrial Revolution, all those steam engines and electrification, had fundamentally solved the problem of production, and henceforth, all that mattered would be how the existing wealth would be redistributed. That's really the essence of Marxism. And last year, Brian Arthur of the Santa Fe Institute and a technologist of note, economist, declared that the new robotics and machine learning and search engines and game-playing machines had really climaxed the human story. In the future, all will matter is mechanisms for redistribution. So, but the fact is that what Google and all these current incumbent computer science sovereigns actually are ruling is an empire in decline. It's really reached the end of its line. Now, in 1990, I wrote a book called Life After Television. And in Life After Television, I said that the dominant computer of the future would be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It would recognize speech. It would navigate streets. It would collect your news and your mail. It just might not do windows, but it'll do doors. Open doors of perception, doors to your future. So that was a kind of prophetic book, and Steve Jobs passed it around among his buddies. So I claim some very peripheral contribution to the development of the iPhones that many of you use. Now the iPhone 10 has 16 different sensors on it and is rather more advanced device than I imagined back in 1990. So, but less prophetic in 1990 was my prophecy that there would be no more unwanted ads. No one would have to see any advertisements that they didn't want to see anymore. And I said that with all the advance of software and digital technology, that it would inevitably come to pass that people would be able to suppress all ads they didn't want to see and select the ones they did, and render ads additional rather than minuses, or even mines, pop-up mines, which they, adhesives, which they really have become. So Google instead imposed this new regime of aggregate and advertise, and still 95% of its revenues come from its advertising business. And it is true that Google does succeed in rendering ads more discrete and more targeted and more desired, but it's quite limited and unimpressive success compared to what I think is entirely possible. So, but this aggregate and advertise regime, which entails fending off all potential competition by giving away all your other products free, is really the fundamental Google business model. It's you don't really have any customers anymore. You have advertisers, and you not having customers, you don't really understand the dimensions and qualities of your market. For all your Google's supposedly intimate knowledge of all of us, they lack knowledge that is most fundamental to any economic proposition, and that is knowledge of supply and demand in the marketplace. And as a result, Urs Hölzl, who's in charge of all big Google data centers from the beginning, a brilliant man and really a titan at Google, because Google's greatest accomplishments derive from its computer organization and architecture and its data centers. Urs Hölzl gave a speech to the optical fiber conference in OFC in Los Angeles, and declared that they had failed them. That despite a 60-fold rise in bandwidth over the last 5 years, and these worldwide webs of glass and light operating collectively at petabits per second, still Urs needed 10 times more within the next 3 years in order just to deal with what he described as the unmanageable demand facing Google. And if your goods are all free, this happens. And what free goods really mean is that you are reaching beyond the wallets of your customers reaching beyond the wallets of your customers to steal a customer's time. Because my book, A Scandal of Money and Knowledge and Power, 2 books I've been writing about information theory and economics, both focus on time. Time is what remains scarce when everything else becomes abundant in the Brian Arthur Marxist vision. What becomes scarce when everything else is abundant is time, the speed of light, the span of life. And in Knowledge and Power, I asserted that essentially wealth is knowledge. All the material resources that we have today were available to the cavemen. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is the accumulation of knowledge. And if knowledge is wealth, what is growth? What is economic growth if knowledge is wealth? Well, for years, I've been studying a phenomenon really developed most fully by Henderson at the Boston Consulting Group called the learning curve. It really originated in the Navy and was implemented at Texas Instruments, but the Boston Consulting Group did the most elaborate studies that demonstrated that all across the economy, everywhere you look, are learning curves. Moore's law, appropriately considered as simply a learning curve. With every doubling of volume of units sold, costs drop between 20 and 30%. That was essentially the proposition of the learning curve. And if knowledge is wealth, growth is learning. And it's learning curves that really explain economic growth. Growth is not chiefly an incentive system. Capitalism isn't chiefly an incentive system. It's an information system. And crucial to information systems is there's some kind of ground state that's secure, recognizable, and perpetuated. And the Google system, which ends up creating a whole series of internet fiefdoms and silos in order to address the catastrophe of security on the internet, is the fundamental problem of the internet. And it really overthrows the initial promise of the internet. Without security, without a stable, demonstrable ground state for your functions, you can't have property rights, really, that are secure. You can't have identities. You can't have transactions. Everything really depends fundamentally on a secure ground state. And that is fundamentally based on knowledge, on knowing what is true and what is false, being able to differentiate spurious signals across the net from real signals. And Google's solution to the security problem was centralization. And they've discovered that centralization is not safe. Centralization actually creates the fabled honeypots that attract hackers, that actually invite hackers. So on top of their centralization and their firewalls and all their encryption and protection of their centralized spaces, they now produce these SWAT teams of hackers that they celebrate. Although in their Google website, when you go and look at all the principles that govern Google, there are all kinds of wonderful, uplifting principles. But among their 10 key principles of Google operation, there's no mention of security. And then on a further page, you get a mention of security, and their essential answer is it takes a village. It's we find that most security problems originate with errors by our customers. And we need all our customers to work together to create a secure internet. And so this is really Google abandoning the key factor in a stable system, which is security. So when they establish these fiefdoms, they also invite everybody else to create a fiefdom. If two nerds in Silicon Valley can have their own internet, and Mark Zuckerberg can have his internet, and Bezos can have his internet, and Apple can have its system, then why not the communist Chinese government? Why can't they have their internet, or the Iranian mullahs? Fundamentally, the principle of gaining security by segregating your activities and preventing intercourse across the net is futile and self-defeating, because it results in Google being banished first from China and then almost effectively from Europe. Google's running into increasing problems with this architecture. But luckily, Moore's law has a corollary called Bell's law. And some of you may know Bell's law. That's Gordon Bell, who did the PDP's 11 and all that digital equipment, and now is a very senior fellow at Microsoft. And Bell's law is that every 10 years of Moore's law advances yields more than 100-fold rise in computer cost effectiveness, which demands in turn a completely new computer architecture. And I wrote the first sort of popular article on cloud computing in Wired in 2006, and said cloud computing would have its day. There'd be a re-centralization, but it would be followed by a new decentralization. And the new decentralization is at hand. And it originated in 2008 with Satoshi's paper, which precipitated a massive global efflorescence of creativity in cryptography and in distributed internet architectures that precisely respond to this sclerosis of centralization that we see in the current internet. And it's really perfectly addresses this problem. The blockchain really is a fundamental solution to the problem of establishing a permanent and reliable ground state for identity, transactions, and other crucial needs, property rights across the net. It's a distributed ledger. Now, a distributed immutable ledger. And the problem with it, of course, is that it is, I say of course, but it is at least 10,000 times less efficient than centralized solutions. So this is an obstacle. But the fact is that people who rely on this 10K number as somehow a showstopper for this global insurgence of creativity in distributed peer-to-peer internet architectures that really retrieve the original inspiration of the internet, which was to be distributed and peer-to-peer, underestimate creativity. Creativity always comes as a surprise to us. And if it didn't, we wouldn't need it, and socialism would work. But, my real breakthrough in the last 10 years in writing economics was really focusing on the fact that information, in Shannon terms, is best defined as surprise. That's what information is. It's unexpected bits. And unexpected bits always come as a surprise to us. That's what makes them informative. And all these machine learning systems are really prohibited from generating unexpected bits. If you have a deterministic machine, it can't generate unexpected outcomes, except to the extent that it's random. But randomness is a loss of information rather than a gain of information. So the idea that somehow the determinism of machine learning, the determinism of all these new AI eschatologies is that they're saved by randomness. That is not an answer. The fact is that Gilder and Post and Church and all those, and Turing, all demonstrated that deterministic machines cannot describe the universe. Deterministic machines are not mathematically coherent. They always depend on an oracle, as Turing put it. And they asked Turing what that oracle would be, and he said he couldn't tell you, but it cannot be a machine. And this is why the claims for machine learning and artificial intelligence somehow eclipsing human minds are so fatuous. All machines outperform humans in some form, or we wouldn't adopt them. But they in no way compete with human intelligence, which can generate surprising outcomes, which can, through the avenue of imagination, conceive of all the counterfactuals and creative solutions that a deterministic machine cannot do. And it even, one of my companies that I'm particularly interested in is started by a Thiel fellow named, who Peter Thiel lured out of college with $100,000 to start a company. And it's called Luminar, and it's built by a now 19-year-old, I guess, named Austin Russell. And he decided that all the Google model for self-driving cars could not be successful using the existing technologies. All the existing technologies basically for self-driving cars originated with DARPA's cross-country challenge. And Sebastian Thrun came out of it and went to Google and assembled the team at Waymo, and that team split into various other teams. But they all ultimately relied on the same essential technology for self-driving cars and relied on the advance of machine learning and AI to solve the residual problems like pedestrians in your way. And Austin Russell came out and said, as a kid, he'd been making self-driving technology since the age of 12. And he said this will never work, that accidents are almost by definition combinatorial explosions of various sorts that really can't be anticipated by a deterministic machine or a randomized deterministic machine. So he said that what we needed was LiDAR that was at least 50 times better, and he started out to produce that. And earlier this year, he announced that a single chip system that was 50-fold better resolution and performance by a whole series of indices than the prevailing LiDAR systems. And the four big auto companies have adopted it, including Toyota was the first public announcement. And it's a major development that yields a 7-second advantage to the car in responding to unexpected developments. But even mathematics itself ultimately has to be a creative, imaginative science, not the discovery of some intrinsic determinism across Laplacian model across the universe. And life after Google will continue and be more exciting than ever using human imagination. Silicon Valley will start making humans more productive again rather than trying to displace them. And with a new internet architecture, which is on the way, we can replace this current winner-take-all internet, as they say, with an internet in which we all can be winners. Thank you.